Okay, this is the final chapter of this episode, and we'll proceed with the final touches to the scene and the actual rendering. So all the hard work is over right now, and we'll have to just finish this up. So let's switch back to the layout workspace, and let's scroll out a little bit and enable render preview. Hold Z and go to the rendered. And you can see right away how these puddles make the scene even more interesting. And you can see these reflections on the water and how the water is actually translucent. Here you can't see it too well because there are a lot of dots here, and I will explain what that means. The Cycles is based on a technology called path tracing, or you can know it as a ray tracing. These are basically two different things, but they're very similar. What path tracing does, it shoots rays as the real photons of light would go, and calculate all the light bounces and writes down the information and determines the color and shadow information. That's why this is computer intensive operation, and that's why the GPU helps very much with these kind of things. And I want you to know that because there is one thing in the render settings, and if you go there right away, click just render, there is a part called sampling, and there is a render and viewport option. And what this is basically how many times does the engine shoot these rays, because if it does only once, the image is very distorted. It doesn't have information about all the light paths, so it's very noisy, and with just one sample you wouldn't be able to see anything basically. So here in the viewport it's set to 32, so for every pixel of the render there is 32 rays that are traced to the target location in the 3D scene, and all the color and shadow values and the light values are calculated. Most often for these types of illustrations I go for 512. I think that's enough. And it's still noisy, but you can always use some kind of denoising to fix the problem with these dots. And if you want to do that right now, you can go to the View Layer tab right here. Let's collapse these other options, and you can check the denoising. Sometimes the result from this can be a little bit distorted, and there could be some artifacts, and it could look like bad compression or something like that, because this denoiser isn't the best in the world. There is one other options. It's called a denoise. You can see it right here, but you might not have it there because it's an add-on that you have to download first, and it's an AI based denoiser, but I won't use that here because I think in this second episode we already covered a vast number of topics. So let me come back to the denoise add-on in the next episode, and right now just check the denoising and leave it like that. And let's go back to the render settings. And the one last thing I like to play with is the color management, which you can find all the way here at the bottom of the screen. And right here I like to switch the look to the medium high contrast and bring up the exposure. And let's bring it up maybe to 1.2. I think 1 will be enough for these light values. And you could already see how the midtones were up, how the scene got filled with light. And that's why I used the medium high contrast, or sometimes even the high contrast, so the effect of that isn't so dramatic. but it really brings out the illustration. It really elevates the whole image when you play with that exposure. And I'm not saying that with every image you should do 1 exposure or 1.5 exposure or something like that. No, you just keep that in mind that this option exists, and every time you have your lighting set up and your scene ready to render, go here and play with the exposure and the contrast settings. And that's something that could take your image these 20-25% further and make it look even better. So now it's just about rendering the image, and we could press F12 like the episode before and render right away, but I want to show you something additional. Here on the render there's a display mode, and right now it's set to new window, so when you press F12 the new window opens and the rendering is shown there. But I like to keep that in Blender window, so let's just check the image editor. And if you would press F12 right now, this layout view would change to the image editor and the rendering would occur. So you can do that, or you can go to the rendering tab here, change this image to render result and press F12, and rendering will start right here. Right, now after a while the render should be finished. Here it took 3.5 minutes on my GPU, so yeah, this might be different for you. And this is the final picture, and if you follow all of the steps thoroughly, you should be able to have the same result as I have right here. But I wanted to point out that we really went through these render and color management settings. We went through it really fast, and sometimes this is the point of the design where I spend even 50% of the time spent, and that's because this is the place where I do the first render, look at it and see all the problems, all the places where I don't like the shadows, where I don't like the lights, where I don't like the shape of some object or rotation of some tree, or basically anything. Or I see there is a problem with composition. You can zoom out and really see that this won't be the image that get noticed on the social media or something like that. So if you notice these problems, you go back and fix them. So every time I go back to the layout view and play with the light settings, with the rotation of the lights, you know, you can always find some different settings and really push your design even more. And it's a good rule to maybe do 2 or 3 iterations and then stop. After a while you just have to stop and let the design be as it is. But then again, you just don't want to give it one shot and leave it like that. Always keep in mind that to really be improving and making every design better and better, it's always good to make at least 2 or 3 iterations in this final stage, where you just check the whole scene, whole setup you have in place, and tweak the variables, play with the objects, play with the composition, maybe save it to a new file and completely rework it and rotate it and look from a completely new and different, fresh perspective. Yeah, that's kind of a little artistic advice to you if you really want to keep improving and have better designs. This is the part where I spent a lot of time. Yeah, this is it. This is your second illustration in this course, and there are a few more coming. And I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'm looking forward to see you on the next episode. Good job, everybody.